Hi, and welcome back to the short series exploring horror. I'm your host and guide, Alex. Today, we're going to work on breaking down the term horror into smaller pieces so we can more easily talk about what's going on in each genre and how to use it effectively. So, what is horror? At first glance, that probably seems like a simple question, but the answer goes deceptively deep. If you Google the definitions, you'll find that it's something which elicits fear, shock, or disgust, but that really contains a very wide variety of things. If you think about it, you might be disgusted by gore in a film like Saw, but you're also likely to be repulsed by a player suffering a particularly bad injury in a sport. If you've ever seen one of those videos where a football player gets tackled and suddenly their leg is bending the wrong way, you'll know exactly what I mean. But does that make football horrific? Maybe or maybe not. Uh, like a lot of genres of art, it's pretty hard to assign strict boundaries to the label of horror. Of course, that doesn't really help us in understanding how to make horror content ourselves, does it? So let's take another look at that definition. Fear, shock, and disgust. Those are the three elements that define horror, but they also show us three very different forms of horror. The most prominent form of horror in cinema and gaming is shock horror, colloquially called jump scares. That's when the scene grows very quiet and still for a moment, and then suddenly flashes a spooky image at you with some loud, shrill sound cue. Used sparingly, it's an incredibly effective tool, but it's seen far too much use in recent times, and so it's gained the reputation of being a bit of a crutch. Don't let that scare you off, though, because it's a great way to let all the tension out very quickly. The next most commonly seen type of horror is disgust horror. Now, there's quite a few genres of horror that all revolve around the feeling of disgust. We'll go into more specifics on the different types of disgust based horror, but you can basically think of it as the genre where there's a bunch of blood and gore and whatnot. This is where a lot of schlocky horror flicks fall with Friday the 13th, Saw, and even the Evil Dead series to a certain extent. There's obviously a lot of criticism surrounding this type of horror as it intentionally provokes and breaks those delicate social graces which we've developed over the course of human history. Nevertheless, though, it's a very effective form of horror. Finally, we have that word fear. Now, this is where it gets really touch and go because we have to define what fear means too, right? So when you ask yourself, what am I afraid of? It covers a wide range of things. You can be afraid of spiders, of heights, of snakes, or any other kind of physical threat. You can also be scared of ideas, though. Things like cosmic unimportance, the feeling of being watched, the idea of ghosts and evil spirits and whatnot. These are all fears, and they're all very valid things to be afraid of. They're also things that we can exploit to better our horror. But the concept of fear is an extremely wide net to cast, and it covers a huge range of topics and styles. So we're going to spend a couple of videos down the line breaking that feeling of fear up into smaller and more easily discussed pieces. Before that, though, we'll be discussing those other versions of horror, shock and disgust, in more detail. So join me next time when I delve into shock horror and how it works.